Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Janice Waite. I'm a program officer at Mozilla, and I spend much of my time focusing on intersectional approaches for ensuring the web is not built on the backs of individuals' privacy and security. We have a compelling panel planned for you today as part of our MozFest Dialogues and Debates series. Many of us are still working from home, researching and trying to network right now, and many of the events in the internet health movement that we look forward to each year have been canceled or are taking place in different formats. For that reason, Mozilla has moved our MozFest Dialogue and Debates series virtual. It's a chance to continue important conversations about online privacy, trustworthy AI, big tech, and similar topics. Today's virtual dialogues and debates is titled Alternative Business Models for the Web. We'll be discussing the single reigning business model, digital advertising, and examining questions such as, is it possible to make alternatives mainstream, and why should we? But before we get started, let me introduce our panelists. Harriet Kingaby is a UK-based Mozilla Fellow embedded at Consumers International, where she researches the consequences of AI-enhanced advertising. She's also the co-chair of the Conscious Advertising Network. Natalie Marichal is a US-based senior policy analyst at Ranking Digital Rights. Natalie led the expansion of Ranking Digital Rights' Corporate Accountability Index methodology to address human rights risks associated with tech companies' business models, specifically looking at the role that targeted advertising and algorithmic systems play in shaping online experiences. Akintunda Sultan is a Nigerian-based developer and organizer working at the intersection of web monetization, developer support, and content creation. He's the founder of Dev Careers, a nonprofit supporting developers across Africa, and is an ambassador with Grant for the Web. As a side note here, I should mention that the Mozilla Foundation has teamed up with COIL and Creative Commons to support Grant for the Web, which is a grant program funded by COIL to drive innovation around an open web standard, web monetization, that has been proposed to the WC3. Sultan will talk more about that later. And one last thing, we are taking questions for the panel in real time. Tweet them at Mozilla with the hashtag dialogues and debates. Okay, let's get started. The web celebrated its 27th birthday this year. A quarter a century ago, it wasn't necessarily predetermined that the web would be powered by advertising, but that's sort of how it's evolved. I don't want to give the impression in having this conversation that all advertising is harmful. It's not. Advertising has supported everything from local newspapers to network television and has a place. But today's digital advertisements have very little in common with traditional advertising. So let's start with some context. And I'll ask one of you to kick off with an answer to each of these questions, but the others please chime in after if you have something to add. So to get us started with some context, how prevalent and powerful is digital advertising, and what about advertising has changed, and how did we get here? Natalie, will you kick us off?
Thanks, Janice, and thanks so much to Mozilla for organizing this conversation. I think it's a really important one. So the roots of targeted advertising on the web go back to the late 90s, when a lot of the fashions that we would be seeing today, if any of us actually ventured outside, were cool for the first time, and when Google search was first born. So Google search, as some of you may remember, and others of you may have learned since then, was really one of the first products to make it easy for people to surf the web, to find things without clicking from one site to another and kind of just either already knowing where you're going or just serendipitously stumbling onto things. And it did that by using by scraping the web and figuring out what's more popular or more likely to thus inferred to be more likely to be authoritative based on how many incoming links a specific page had to it, right? And so all of this data that went into making search work also gave tremendous insights into what searches tend to lead people to click to what sites, what searches tend to be performed one after the other, what people and what people and I don't mean at this stage individuals, but what people in terms of what ISPs they were connecting from, where in the country or the world they were connecting from. Increasingly, data about who these people were and other information about their behavior or their demographics led to what kinds of searches and what kind of online behavior. And when the dot-com bubble burst at the end of the 90s, Google realized that they were sitting on this trove of information that they could use to make money. And that was really important because in the context of the crash, or the bubble bursting at least, Google really needed a business model. They couldn't rely just on their investors to keep them afloat. And so they started selling ads, and it started being relatively contextual ads. You know, you search for plumbers, you get ads for plumbers, and so on. But as web tracking technologies became more sophisticated and more of commerce and daily life moved online, they were able to get increasingly granular information about people and who they are and what they do online. And from there, the business model spread like wildfire, first across the tech industry and then into all kinds of other sectors of the economy, from healthcare to education to retail to hospitality. I mean, you name it, there's some kind of a connection to what Harvard scholar Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. And the next step from there of kind of predicting who is likely to click on what or to see what or to react in a specific way to an advertisement leads companies to help advertisers place bets on where is the best place to put my ad so that people who are likely to engage with it in the way that I want them to, meaning at the very least click on it and hopefully lead to some kind of a purchase or some other change in their behavior. How do I figure out what's the best return on investment as far as that's concerned? And then from there, the industry realized that the best way to ensure that you win your bet is to actually interfere in the auction process itself, and to nudge people to take the step that is most likely to lead to the behavior that you want, whether that's making a purchase, changing a vote, or what have you. And so now we're in a situation where a huge and growing swath of the economy is based not just on tracking people and analyzing their behavior and their data in order to show them ads, but on changing their behavior in ways that are as financially rewarding as possible for both the advertisers and for the advertising networks, including Google and Facebook, but there are many others, including a lot of data brokers that none of us have ever heard of. And this, I think, is something that is really concerning.
Harriet or Sultan, did you want to add?
Well, I think she covered basically everything in my head. Yeah, from that particular angle. But then I think I'm cool on that for now, right now.
Harriet?
I was just going to add actually that also the internet itself is a common in the same way that the atmosphere is a common, or the kind of common ground. And traditionally, it's very difficult to protect commons. So when we talk about power in advertising, I think everything that Natalie is completely right. Advertising it drives parts of the economy. It creates jobs. It has trade bodies. It has all these power dynamics in place. And when we're talking about how the internet develops, it's really important to understand that actually, we've got loads of environmental protection legislation that looks at protecting our environmental commons, but we don't have similar things for the internet. So advertising is a very powerful force in shaping the development of the internet.
And how is that changing the web? What are some of the negative consequences that this kind of targeted advertising, this AI-powered advertising is having, both on the individual or the collective? Harriet?
Sure. I mean, when we can see the influences of this kind of this technology in everything from journalism to the content that's actually available on the web. So the first thing to understand is that by essentially kind of funding the internet, advertising kind of sets the precedent that we should be considering our time on the internet as a commercial opportunity. So, for example, metrics of success are things like, are we responding to the adverts? How long are we on the page? You know, kind of, are we staying on a platform long enough to see the next video, or are we commenting or kind of getting upset or excited about what's on there? And so what that does is it changes the measures of success for industries like journalism. So, for example, we've seen journalistic headlines evolve to be more salacious, to look more like clickbait, or to kind of gain a response from individuals, even if to even not reflect the articles that they might kind of show. We've seen that it's harder for you know, quality journalism and kind of hard news to monetize itself, because advertising wants to be next to things that are, you know, kind of nice, or, you know, kind of promote the brand in a great way. It doesn't want to be next to pictures of riots or civil unrest. When we look at, it also means that it's difficult for diverse content to monetize itself. So, for example, 73% of LGBTQ plus content is rendered unmonetizable in the current system. That's also the same if you want to read content aimed at the Muslim community. And what this does is it creates you know, very, very kind of odd dynamics, and it means that if you speak a language that isn't English, or, you know, isn't one of the languages that is profitable, it also means that you don't get content made for you. So we're seeing lots of different ways in the way that this is shaping our online experience.
That's powerful. Natalie, Sultan?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'd like to underscore here is that the logic of targeted advertising is a logic that's based on discrimination. It's based on the idea that we can track and analyze, once again, data about who people are and what they do, about their demographics, their traits, their behaviors, and treat them differently on the internet on the basis of that information. Now, some of the time, it's not a big deal, right? You know, the web advertising infrastructure can tell that my browser is set to English and so it shows me ads in English and not in a different language that I may not speak. Or it knows that, you know, I'm located in the Washington D.C. metro area, and so it'll show me information. Well, perhaps not now, but in the before times, they would show me ads for concerts and sports events and restaurants in my city, and not you know, in Sydney, Australia, for example. And that sort of thing makes sense, and I don't think poses you know, concern necessarily. But it's the exact same technology and market logic that makes it possible, for example, for politicians to disseminate Facebook ads targeting African American and other communities of color in the US with incorrect information about how or when to vote, as happened in the 2016 and 2018 elections. And despite social media platforms' best intentions, is likely to recur again this year. And so far, there's no good way to draw a distinction between the types of targeting that are benign or maybe even helpful, and the kinds that are really, really harmful. And that's because here again, there's a logic that everything should be automated, that everything should be based on data. And algorithmic systems are just not good enough and are unlikely to ever be good enough at scale to draw that distinction. But because human beings are expensive, it turns out you have to pay us a living wage. It turns out that when you show us lots of videos of people being beheaded, we get really bad mental illness and PTSD and require time off from work and so on. So there's here again a market logic to replace humans with machines to do jobs that machines are just not equipped to do. And until there's either a regulatory or a market force that makes it more expensive for companies to do the right thing, right, than it is to do the wrong but lucrative thing, we're in this really vicious cycle that's going to be hard to break, again, without either regulatory or other kinds of interventions.
That's very amazing, and I think I really support that part of actually creating a system that actually monitors and regulates the way these data are had. Because whether we like it or not, there is data out there, a whole lot of data, and it belongs to a certain set of people, or should I say, a certain set of organizations. So that data is not made available for everybody to use. So it's like if you have the data, you can change the market dynamics with the data that you have. So I think there should be a kind of regulatory system managing the particular data, because one thing I've learned is data doesn't go away. You don't destroy data. So it's always going to be there. So it's either you use it or not. So depending on how you want to use it, you can't force people to stop using the data. But perhaps if you can create a model or a system where they're using it the right way, then I think that's the first step of how we should actually look at things when it comes to issues like this.
And how have these practices changed the web?
Well, one thing is, should I go first on that?
Sure.
Okay, so one thing is this is you made mention earlier that somebody mentioned that now you have to bid for keywords when it comes to ads. That means it's the higher your pocket, the larger your pocket, the better the results you get. So it means that this goes far beyond just ads as we see it. It goes to the bottom feeders of the economy also. Meaning for people in low income areas, they have to spend more to get something because the producer is actually putting in the cost of advertisement on the product itself. You understand? So the market is $300 billion per annum market as of now, which is probably going to still increase next year. So meaning that's close to 388 million naira per day on ads, even probably more than. So whatever a product is coming out there, the manufacturer, the producer, the marketer, they are actually adding the cost of ad because they want to bid higher for the particular keyword, meaning they have to actually increase the cost. So if you should go for $2, probably add an extra 50 cents to that because, I mean, you're going to pay for the ads that's making us get this product to you, which means the whole, should I say, the competition is flawed from the beginning. So it means the higher the money you have, the larger the money you have, the better results you get. So that's a flawed system. If we look at it critically, it means the whole system is actually focused on a particular group of people or a particular set of organizations, which means individual content creators are probably fighting the losing battle right from the start.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned content creators, and that was something that I wanted to get into a little bit. And there are actually so many layers we could explore here, from misinformation to so many things. But in addition to the privacy harms that we've talked a little bit about, you mentioned content creators. There are other obstacles that content creators, that developers, that publishers and media outlets are facing in this web environment, from all-powerful big tech platforms, AI powered recommendation engines, and rewarding clicks, not quality. So let's dig into this a little bit. How are independent artists, developers, and other creators impacted, particularly in this system? Sultan, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, definitely. Let me do that. Okay. So I think I said earlier that for individual or independent content creators, it means you actually have to start with a very high capital to actually even get noticed in the market. That's one. The other issue, I think, again, is the data that's out there, it's limited. The data itself is unlimited, but the access to the data is limited, meaning the top people in the industry don't want to share this data with you. So, I mean, it's your data, it's my data, but we don't have access to it. So when it comes to targeted ads and co, it's only meant for a certain set of people who have access to that data to even target the environment, the behavior pattern, the particular geographical location of the people that they want, meaning they can make them do anything. If you happen to have a competitor now with probably a product with a very large scale business, and they decide that, okay, with the data we have, let's make sure that everybody in this region sees our product only. They have the money to actually back that. I meaning that, I remember earlier now we have to pay for keywords when we search. So the result that comes means that the higher you bid for a particular keyword, the higher you get ranked for that particular keyword. So everything now has to do with the money. The money is being generated from the ads. The ads, people want targeted ads because of the result. And the targeted ad, the data that powers this targeted ad is owned by a very small group of people, which probably control the whole market economics itself. So if you want to do anything for the content creator, individual producers, and the independent artists, I would say they need the kind of like the law on their side. They need public regulatory bodies on their side because it's affecting them negatively. Yeah, I think that's the word, negatively. Earlier on, about 5-10 years ago, the major definition of digital marketing was more like something that allows you get access out there, irrespective of how big your brand is. I think that was the word Google do use over then, back then. Like, okay, even if you are from a small shop, the advert goes like this: from a shop, from a small shop to a big organization, you can get your product out there. So you don't have to be big. That's the notion that we have, that, oh, even if you are independent, even if you are just starting up, you don't have to beat to actually use digital marketing. But then now there's not a word for keywords on it. So even if I'm small and I want to use digital marketing, I need to actually start fighting for keywords with big organizations, which I can't possibly win. So it's affecting them negatively in various angles. And right now it's, I think, yeah, I did mention the higher budgeting, higher costs, which I think normally people wouldn't notice. But then when it comes to product placement and product building and manufacturing, you have to actually make profit. You need to actually go over your, is it the product cost, something like that. So you need to actually go higher than the product cost. And right now, the companies will actually add the marketing costs to the product cost. I mean, we are not asking them to market to us, though. We're not asking them for those for those ads, but they have to add it to it because they feel that's the only way to get the product to us. Meaning we are paying for the advert. We, the consumers, are not paying for the advert. I mean, nobody wants to run a losing market. So that's another angle that's not benefiting. It's not going to benefit the individual creators and independent artists because they don't have the funds. They don't have the funds. They don't have the data. I mean, those are probably you need probably just three things to actually push your product out there right now, or push your content out there. You know the data to know where you want to put the product. You need the funds that actually supports the product, and you need the product itself. So we know that, of course, we have the product. I'm referring to myself as an independent creator right now. So I have the product, but I don't have the data and I don't have the funds to actually push it out there. So it means the whole system is actually flawed against me. So definitely money ranks your content. So which means we know it's a negative impact for the individual content creator. I think that's it for now.
And what about publishers or media outlets, Harriet? I know you've looked into their practices and impact a little bit as well.
Definitely. So, I mean, just to build on what Sultan said, I don't think the system's working for anybody. Like, we know that advertisers are losing lots of money to fraud through this system, and and middlemen. A recent study found that like 15% of ad spend just disappears. No one knows where it goes. It's not working for the content creators themselves because they're struggling to, they're struggling to kind of make the kind of money that they need. And I know that the way that things are shared on the platforms plays a role in that. So, I mean, first off, I would kind of look at how this kind of new models impacting kind of quality journalism, because essentially when when an advertiser is working out where they want their advertising to go, kind of inventories are lumped in together. So you've got you kind of quality news outlets like, I don't know, the New York Times, the Washington Post, whatever, lumped in with cat videos and kind of like junk on the long tail of the internet. And what this does is it creates it creates really difficult dynamics. It means that kind of journalism hasn't been able to invest. It means that kind of revenues at those major publishers come down. It means it's also done weird things like create business models for hate speech and misinformation online. I don't know, everyone knows about the kind of the Pizzagate scandal, which was kind of driven in some ways by kind of Macedonian teenagers who are kind of making a lot of money by posting misinformation about, kind of in the run up to the 2016 US elections, and making a lot of money from doing that. But the same is true of hate speech. So content creators who create hate speech often, kind of that is a very reactionary content. The language is inflammatory. It gets a lot of reactions online, be they positive or negative. And so it actually, kind of those pages that kind of host that content, kind of get a lot of shares, a lot of whatever, and are not only prioritized by the platforms, but also kind of find it easy to monetize themselves on the open web because they look like they've got a lot of traffic. And the UN's kind of picked up on this in its economics of hate. So we've got that angle. And then we've got the fact that content creators, even if their native language might be, I don't know, kind of, even if their native language might be quite niche, it's not actually commercially viable for them to make content in that language. It's much more commercially viable for them to make content in English or one of the European languages, for example. And so what that creates is, kind of, we're not actually providing for a lot of people through, kind of on the internet in general. So we've got all of those dynamics going on as well.
Natalie, I see you nodding quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with the insights that both Sultan and Harriet have shared. What I'll add to that is that a lot of the efforts that platforms have implemented to try to address some of these harms end up being done in such a way that it has even more negative repercussions on people who are not even part of that dynamic in the first place. And I'll use the example of racist content to illustrate that. So a lot of advertisers and brands are quite wisely, do not want to have their ads shown next to blatant disinformation and propaganda and bigoted content. And I think the Stop Hate for Profit campaign is a really clear example of that desire. But so what happens is that in order to make their advertisers happy, platforms and ad networks here again try to automate the process of screening for brand safety, for excluding types of sites or content against which they will not run certain ads. But again, because it turns out AI is not as smart as people, and it never will be, they end up catching a whole bunch of content that is actually exactly the opposite of what they're trying to screen out, right? So they say, we don't want to, a brand says, I don't want my content to be run against Alex Jones and similar racist filth. And Black Lives Matter content ends up getting caught in the same filter because a lot of the keywords used are similar, right? And that has impact not only for content creators who rely on that for income, but also on simply the spread and the diffusion of this information. That is, in fact, really important counter speech that is advancing human rights and civil rights and causes that are pro-social and that the advertiser may very well support, right? And we see the same dynamic with a lot of different content, right? Like it happens a lot with sexual content that has to, the filter is meant to not to, from a brand safety perspective, to exclude either, once again, bigotry, but also adult content, but ends up excluding sexual health information or reproductive health information and so on. And you see that really across the spectrum of issues.
Yeah, those are all very good examples for sort of showing some of the very negative impacts that the advertising business model as it's currently dominating the web is having on our experience online. And Harriet, I thought you said something a little bit earlier about, we should be considering our time on the internet as commercial time. And to me, it's very telling that there's a sort of culture shift that needs to happen here. We could probably spend a long time talking about these harms and these impacts, a lot of the problems that exist within the current dynamic of economy on the web. But I want to take us into a new space, which is alternatives that exist for the current dominant business model. How could we sustain content online without advertising? Are there glimmers of hope for decentralizing the economic power of the web, and what are they? Natalie, do you want to go first?
Sure, of course. So I think the one really important thing is to differentiate between targeted or behavioral advertising specifically and advertising more broadly, right? As long as we live in a market-based economy, which I certainly anticipate will be at least my lifetime. And as long as people use speech and communication to try to influence each other's behavior, which I'll anticipate will be as long as there are people, we will have advertising in some way or another. And I don't see any problem with that. The problem is when the advertising is so data-driven and inherently discriminatory, right? Because when you hear personalization, I want you to think discrimination, right? That's where the problem is. So I think, I think the main way to look, the main place to look for new business models is to rely on as little personal and behavioral data as possible. Now, again, there are certain pieces of data that are really relevant and unlikely to cause any harm. Language personalization. Show me something I can actually understand would be one of them. Very broad geographic location, certainly no smaller than a city or a region, may also make sense in a lot of contexts. But I think most other forms of data should simply be excluded from the equation, unless the person has voluntarily signed up for something, right? And there's a lot of different ways that you could do that. I could imagine a social media platform saying, like, what, in order to use our service, since we do need to keep the lights on and pay our employees, you need to self-identify as being part of, let's say, 10 different audience categories. And we will show you ads targeted at those categories. Now, you pick categories that either match who you actually are, or you can pick something completely different. It's really up to you whether or not you want to see ads that are more or less relevant to you, so to speak. Another way to do that would be to move towards first-party advertising based on first-party data versus third-party data. And without going into too nerdy of an explanation of what that is, that's the difference between, so third-party data is basically any data you can get your hands on is good, is up for grabs. And I am simplifying a bit here. So Twitter mobs, calm down. On the other hand, you have first-party data, which is what the New York Times, to use one example, is moving towards, where only data that relates to how people use the New York Times website and apps is relevant to showing advertising, and for that matter, for recommending news stories. So, for example, the New York Times would correctly pick up on the fact that I read a lot of tech news and absolutely no sports, right? So it is going to show me both news stories and ad content that is related to the fact that I'm interested in technology and not at all interested in sports. But it might show my brother the exact opposite. And I think that's a really promising model, but again, something that is really complicated and costly to implement. So that's something that the New York Times can do, but that smaller media outlets cannot do. And then the third element I'll point to before I shut up here is public service subsidies. That's something that in the US in particular, we're really shy about for a lot of historical reasons I won't go into. But in order to have public service media, you need to have non-commercial sources of revenue. And there is absolutely a concern to be had about state-controlled media, but there is such a thing as robust, publicly funded, independent public service media, and that's a conversation I think that really needs to be front and center, because even in places like the UK that have robust histories and traditions of public service media, that funding is coming under increasing attack every year, and I think we need to reverse that.
Thank you. Sultan, what models are you seeing for sustaining content online that may not include advertising? Where are your glimmers of hope?
I would want to introduce, or should I say, this is an interesting question to me, because it's something I actually enjoy. For the past couple of months, I've been experimenting and I've been reading about testing and even coding. So then I would say one model that covers everything that we actually need now at the solution is probably the web monetization model. Because I've tested what it is web monetization against several other models.
And can you say what that is?
Yeah, definitely. I would get there right now. So before going deep into web monetization, I would want to say I wanted to tell Natalia that the reason why I think New York Post wouldn't want to go do that work of actually trying to segment their audience is because I think they do a lot of companies prefer just the stats. I mean, they want to tell companies that well, we've been able to show your heart to 20,000 people today. They don't want even if it's not the 10,000 people that are actually interested in the heart. So I think the numbers would drop really for them. So they wouldn't want something like that. So they deal in the figures. So even if it's not hard to implement, I doubt they would be interested in implementing something like that. Okay, so web monetization. Web monetization it's a model. It's an online model that actually allows both the content creator and the consumer, those are the users, to actually have. That's the only model that actually puts both parties in place when it comes to any business model online in terms of product and should I say content creation and content viewing online. So web monetization is a I don't want to give out the unofficial definition. I'm trying to make it very as simple as possible as I can. So okay, all other models online out there, the advertising model, the subscription based model, they actually have one thing in common, and that's they're actually the product based, meaning the company, the organization is the major focus when it comes to something like that. So I mean, if you have a subscription-based model, you're subscribing to that particular platform. If it's an ad, the company is the one in charge here, and they're the one that would probably decide what to show you or not. So web monetization is the only model that actually puts both the user in focus and also the creator also in focus. So what that means simply is if me as a user right now, if I'm a web monetized user, it means that I have a certain amount of something here, which I would want to call funds or money. And every time I actually access a particular content from any creator, I take part of that money and use it to actually say, okay, I've accessed your content. This is the payment for that particular content. Now, in between this particular, my bank, in between my bank of money here and the content I'm actually consuming at that particular time, there is a service called Coil. So Coil is the one who determines that, okay, this content you're actually viewing right now, it should cost 0.2 cents. Okay, so take 0.2 cents from Sultan's Bank to actually pay this particular creator. I mean, it looks small, but when 1 million people look at that particular content in a day, that's okay for the content creator. That's a source of revenue. And also the good part for the user also is that if the content creator is actually has you in mind also, then you get to cut out all the issues of clickbait, all the issues of ads, all the issues of forced registrations. I mean, that's how they gather data, right? That's how they gather the data. So if the company or the creator also wants to ease you of that stress with web monetization, you don't need to go through all those stress. Just have the coil extension or just be web monetized as a user. So web monetization is a simple model that actually supports both the content creator and the user at once at the same time. So yeah, let me now go into the question now, right? Or I mean, somebody else wants to talk.
Well, Harriet, I wanted to see if Harriet had an example of alternatives that she's seeing out there in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely appetite for change. And I think, you know, we've on one side, we mentioned the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, which has prompted a load of charities to kind of get together and try and brainstorm actually how they might reach their supporters without kind of funding Facebook. You've got organisations like Brand Advance who've been set up specifically to make sure that LGBTQ plus publications can monetize themselves. You know, these are ad-based models, but these are really important conversations. And I think, you know, like what we don't have at the moment is like a vision for how everything fits together. We don't have a vision for how, you know, kind of if advertising can, well, with things like the Conscious Advertising Network, we're trying to kind of create roadmaps and a kind of an idea of what a respectful, effective ad-funded internet looks like. But equally, we don't, like when we look at the legislation and the kind of the consultations that come through from, you know, from the EU and things like that, I'm just not seeing that kind of sense of like where we're going. I've seen like real appetite for this. I've seen fantastic alternatives that are kind of growing and are kind of kind of being nurtured, and I think there's great appetite there. But I think like we've kind of got to do both. We've got to kind of make sure that the alternatives have the funding and kind of have the space to breathe and kind of be developed. Yeah. And also I think we've got to kind of be looking at advertising reform at the same time, and working out what it is that we want to achieve with that reform, so that we're kind of creating an online space that respects people as complete people, citizens and consumers, that that builds consumer protection back in, I think we were talking about, but it's also kind of a reasonable way of brands talking to consumers, and that's quite a lot to do.
We're running short on time, and you just touched on something that I wanted to make sure we got to. So very quickly, I'm going to ask each of you to respond, 30 seconds or less. What needs to happen in order to shift this power dynamic, in order to make this cultural shift, and for there to be alternatives? What needs to happen? Sultan, I'll start with you.
Okay, I would say, since I have 10 seconds for this, I would say majorly the data that's out there already needs to be made available, not just for the people who gather the data, but then let's say for the public, and perhaps we need regulations on how these data are actually being used. Whether we want it or not, for the next 10 years, I believe those data out there are still valid for the next 10 years. Meaning, if the data was used for an election to actually shift the power of election, or probably change the behaviors of the people who are actually meant to actually elect a leader, it's still going to be valid for the next 10 years, minimum. So whether we want it or not, the data, something must be done about the massive data out there. So probably there should be regulations that actually supports, and probably a council that actually manages how the data out there is being used. I think that's one for me.
Natalie?
I think I agree with the latter part of what Sultan just said. We absolutely need robust privacy legislation that's strictly enforced. The EU has taken a good step forward with the GDPR, though enforcement is lacking. Meanwhile, in the US, it's a total mess. And so that, to my mind, is the single most important thing that needs to happen. Until that happens, no company is going to be the first mover to respect privacy. There are just too many financial risks to putting your neck out there first. Yeah. So we need a level playing field that actually respects privacy and data protection, and that requires regulation.
And Harriet?
Yeah, to build on that, I agree, and I also think that we need industry. Like, I work a lot with industry, so like we need industry to get ahead of legislation, and to also we need a kind of a collective vision for what we're aiming for. Like, we advocate that advertisers change their advertising strategies to consider the funding of a healthy internet, and we believe that actually that by creating accountability and transparency around that advertising supply chain, our member companies are considering a lot more where their money goes. So, defunding the bad stuff, trying to fund more of the internet that they want to see, and also, keeping ahead of the legislation that we talked about. And we hope that through that we can fund great quality journalism, great content, all the stuff that we want to see, and be defunding the hate speech, misinformation, and the stuff that's much less desirable.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for joining us today. That felt like a very short amount of time to discuss some very deep and weighty issues. So I hope this conversation continues. But what I'm hearing is there are glimmers of hope. There are models that are possible. And that we need to level the playing field. So let's go do that. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much for having us, Janice.
Thank you very much.